for everyone that's on today's call already, thank you for making time to join us. And we're really excited to be hosting today's session. The title of today's event and the session and the topic at hand is Net Zero GHG Emissions, a Global Focus. So where do I start? Just a quick rehash. You may have, for those people that have been on previous OPMMA events, we're a volunteer-based organization, and we thought we'd share our pictures. So here's the team that works behind the scenes to organize, think of, and really advocate for product management and marketing in the Ottawa area. So if you're ever interested, we're always, looking for new voices, new perspectives, and new energy. So feel free. Always a call to action. You can reach out to us. And if we reach out to you, which we have done with many people, we're so pleased that you always make time for us. So thank you. Takes a whole team to run an event like this. Just to do a plug for the mentorship, OPMMA mentorship is very popular. We do hear that, there's a lot of value that is achieved by the mentors and mentees. So if you're interested, a colleague, you're thinking of someone else, or yourself, have them reach out to us. And even if you're not regularly attending events, the mentorship is an incredible relationship, networking, and career development opportunity. So feel free, take care or take advantage of that and leverage that opportunity by connecting with the OPMMA team. So just a quick agenda. So housekeeping for today's event. Our format for today is going to be a discussion-based event and will be in a presentation format. We hope to allow time for some questions. Well, there's a lot to go through. It's an incredible topic today, so you'll see a slight difference from our last event. And we do want your questions. We want your discussion, and we're going to ask you to engage with us using the participant panel on the right-hand side of the WebEx meeting tool. So feel free, make sure you ask questions, make sure you're engaging, and we're going to try and get to as many of those as we can. Another housekeeping item is that we are recording today's event. If you don't want your camera on, feel free, turn it off, and enjoy today's session. Just as a quick personal introduction to today's topic and the presenters, there are some topics in life and some things that we can think about and engage in that are interesting. Some are important, and we think that today you're going to find that not only is the material and the content and the topic interesting, it is critically important from a professional perspective as well as probably in your personal life. So we're thrilled to be hosting this event, and we're thrilled to introduce Doug Michaelides and Charles Funk. So we have two distinguished presenters here. I'm going to hand over shortly to Doug. He's got a long track record in a career in product management and business leadership and in environmental activities. And Charles has got a long career as well in product management. Both are very active in the Ottawa area. Charles has been engaged with so many organizations, and he's incredibly passionate about environment as well. So, just please take a look through. We'll be able to share these slides after today's event, and you can really, if you want to connect with Doug and Charles, what a great opportunity to grow your personal networks. So as I hand over to Doug, just remind everyone what today's topic is, and thank you so very much for making time today. And we'll be talking about how you can get involved as we move forward with this particular topic. So over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Michaelides. I'm very excited about this session. Charles and I have had a fairly intense and fun, well, at least fun for me, time comparing notes and perspectives on climate change and what needs to be done. I'll start out by saying we don't necessarily agree on the details of the path forward, but that's okay, because I know Charles is thoughtfully developing his opinions based on quality research, and I really respect that. I'm glad he's going to have the chance to share that with you. And I hope you'll all do the same. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions. As Amanda indicated, I'm involved a little bit on environmental topics in the city. I consider myself fairly knowledgeable about climate change and about the range of actions that are available to address it. So I'm concerned about the risks. To be honest, I'm a little frustrated at the slow pace of progress. But overall, I'm optimistic because, well, we're getting people like you engaged, and you know, I strongly believe that that's how things are going to change and how things are going to progress. So before we move into Charles' presentation, I'd like to, if you'll pardon the expression, take the temperature around the virtual room, maybe with a couple of poll questions. So Mo, could I ask you to put those up? And the summary, I think everyone's concerned, you know, almost 75%, very or extremely concerned, and but moderately informed. And I appreciate everyone's candor there. And one of the things that I've learned over the course of my discussions with Charles is it doesn't matter how informed you think you are, you can actually always learn a little bit more. And like I said, I consider myself fairly knowledgeable, but through Charles's research, I've been educated on a couple of topics, so that's great. So the purpose of this session is to raise awareness and provide context around the global net zero greenhouse gas target. When we're done, hopefully everyone will feel that they're more informed, and in particular as product managers and marketers, that they're ready to take action, both personally and on behalf of their companies. As Amanda mentioned, if we have time, there'll be a short discussion at the end of the session. I know how much material Charles has to prepare, so we may not have too much time, but regardless, I encourage you to engage with the chat session anyway, ask your questions, make your comments, and those will get collected, and then there'll be follow-up afterwards, and they might seed topics for a follow-up session. So, so just before I turn things over to Charles, maybe Charles, I could ask you a question. Can you tell us what led to your research on climate change? What is motivating you?
Well, it's obviously topical, and I had an opportunity to read a book called How to Avoid Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, which I know can be a controversial figure in this space as well, just given his wealth and own emission footprint. But I found it to be an outstanding book, and I was really surprised to learn how much data there is out there. I'm very data driven. I like to begin with data, and I was like, wow, like this is this is quantified, this is analyzable. We can look at history, we can model, we can trend, and that really got me going on wanting to understand, for myself firsthand, to look at the data, to kind of ingest and internalize the data, and then have a framework for being able to understand the news. This is in the news so much now. Really wanted to raise my level of awareness, and interest. I've been doing pretty intensive research now over the last few months, and I think I answered moderately informed to that whole question, because as you learn more, you realize, wow, this is vast, and there's a lot I don't know.
Yeah, it's a journey of discovery, and I'll put a couple of other books that I've read in addition to the Gates book, Charles, in the chat session. They really kind of get the juices flowing. So why don't you share what you've learned with us? Turn the baton over to you and give us some education.
So one thing that Bill Gates talked about, and many organizations and authors have, is talking about getting to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And so I wanted to come at this from that perspective. What does that mean? What are emissions today? How might we get to net zero? Why are people focused on getting to net zero? And then from a person's perspective, what are the opportunities that this creates, and how might we as product professionals engage? And we're really only going to have an opportunity to touch on this. We're right on track so far. I was supposed to begin at 12:15. I'm going to aim to finish my presentation around 12:45. I had days of material and really a challenge was, how can I synthesize this to useful and digestible. We're going to post the presentation and the PDF of the slides, so anyone who's interested can go and look at it in more detail and follow links to look at the data themselves. But what I tried to do is create a thread from global big picture to where are the opportunities today. So we'll jump in, and the one thing else I wanted to do is just line up my pointer just in case I want to refer to something. Okay, perfect. All right, so big picture. Mean temperature in 1970 was similar to the previous 100 years. Detailed temperatures started to be taken around 1870, 1880. Scientists had been monitoring the temperatures. There's fluctuations year by year, of course, but really there wasn't a noticeable trend. But that began to change, and scientists wanted to understand what might be behind this change, this starting to increase temperature. And carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases were identified as likely drivers of the upward trend. And you can see by 1995, a graphical view of the world temperature is definitely showing an increase, a warming from what was the 1950 to 1980 mean. But by 2020, it's dramatically different. Those are 25-year spans between 70 and 95, and then 2020. On average, the Earth is about 1 degree warmer than it was previously. 1 degree doesn't sound like a lot in a way, but it's significant from historic averages. It's significant in terms of what we're seeing in terms of ice sheets melting, glaciers melting, what seems to be increasing climate challenges and disasters as well. But quite significantly too, the impact of temperature change is higher in the north due to something called Arctic amplification. And so we in Canada and the Arctic are seeing even greater effects from this warming. Now, carbon dioxide was hypothesized to be a driver because of the greenhouse gas effect, which is light or radiation from the sun can come towards Earth, and these molecules reflect it back to Earth or don't let it escape. And so that is known as the greenhouse gas effect. And as those CO2 concentrations were monitored, there began to be a clear trend up, and it was really noticeable after 1960, the acceleration of industrialization, the globalization of industrialization as well. So carbon dioxide levels grew from about 310 parts per million to 415 parts per million now. It still varies, day by day, week by week, but it is in the 410 to 420 range now, about a 33% increase. And this curve is known as the Keeling curve. But when you look at temperature overlaid with carbon dioxide concentration, there is almost near correlation. There are annual and temperature variations, of course, but the trend is clearly up and clearly correlated. So emissions are a key driver of the temperature increase. So I just wanted to spend a bit of time looking at emissions from various lenses. So carbon dioxide is not the only greenhouse gas, but it is the dominant one, and almost 75% of greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, 17% methane, 6% nitrous oxide, and 2% fluorinated gases. And these are converted into something called CO2 equivalents in order to have a uniform measuring stick. So methane actually is 20 to 30 times more greenhouse gas potent, let's say, than carbon dioxide. However, what scientists have done is put these on a common scale to look at their 100-year impact. And so when we look at greenhouse gases as a whole, we can draw conclusions and comparisons. A lot of the data, though, is more readily available around CO2, and some of the more detailed data I'm going to show are around CO2. So how much are we emitting? As a globe, we are emitting 50 gigatons about per year, and a gigaton is 1 billion tons, and a ton is 1,000 kilograms. So that's 50 trillion kilograms of greenhouse gas equivalent emissions on the planet, which is a number that doesn't mean much to most people, but it's very large. If we bring that down to a per person basis, that's about 7 tons per person. Or, so 7,000 kilograms or 15,000 pounds on average. However, that varies quite a bit across the globe. Canada and the US have been historically high emitters due to industry, affluent middle class, cold climate, lots of transportation, big countries. Australia is also among the highest as well. But you can see, compared to the world average, we're much higher. You can see the world overall average has been growing until the last year. The COVID year is the first year in a while there's been a reduction. You can see the EU collectively, this is 28 countries in the EU, have been bringing their emissions down significantly. You can also see Canada and the US have been bringing their CO2 emissions down. It's less dramatic when you look at all greenhouse gases, but it is still a downward trend from the historically highest emitters have crescendoed, let's say, and have started to decline their emissions. China's emissions are growing significantly as they've become really the manufacturer of the world's goods dominantly. If we think about this from the beginning of time, obviously there weren't a lot of emissions pre-1850, but if you look at this cumulatively, Canada has been the largest per capita emitter over that time period, and the United States has been the largest emitter in total over that time period. So looking at this from a different perspective, these are emissions over time collectively globally of CO2. And you can see that they are now about 7 times what they were in 1950, and they're rising sharply. And as I mentioned, Europe and North America's emissions have begun to decline. Asia now represents 60% of global emissions, and it's growing significantly. If you think about that from contribution, number one driver in their economy, is and their dependence upon coal. So let's look at Canada. Canada represents about 1.5% of global emissions, which is around 700 million tons. But I'm happy to see the downward trend on coal usage. And you can see again in 2020, there was a decline in oil and gas as well. But really, we have begun to remove our dependence upon coal, which is excellent. If we
it's Amanda.
look
Sorry,
at
Charles,
what are we using that energy for, the largest ways we are using that are for electricity and heat and transportation. Okay, so what I was saying is that in Canada, and this is not unique, but I just wanted to show the Canadian view here. Electricity, heat, and transportation are the #1 consumers or drivers of emissions. And even when looking at my own emissions, I went through an exercise of calculating my carbon footprint, and heating and driving cars and flying. So electricity, heat, and transport are by far the largest factors of my own footprint. So that's emissions. Let's talk about targets for a bit, because there's been in the news a lot, and this ties to net zero. What does that look like? How could we get there? And I wanted to provide a little bit of context. And this goes back to the Kyoto Agreement and earlier. This has been in the works a long time, but in the more recent history, the Paris Agreement pledged to limit the increase of temperature to 2 degrees C and to strive for less than 1.5 if possible. So I mentioned we're already a degree warmer than the baseline. So that leaves us a degree or less to go, and we continue to emit each year. So even if we reduced how much we emit each year, we are still contributing to overall cumulative emissions in the atmosphere. The global net zero by 2050 target is about how can we limit that to 1.5 degrees. And so that's based on modeling of all the world's emissions, and saying if we can cap that and drive that down to net zero by 2050 following the green shaded curve, we could limit overall increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees. What are shown on the right are various scenarios. So the blue shaded area is based on current policies and actions. What is projected is, a continued increase in emissions, but starting to taper off and ultimately coming down to, let's say, 35 gigatons, which would drive a 2.5 or 3 degree increase in temperature. So that's current policies and actions. Many countries, Canada included, have made targets to achieve things by 2030. And if everyone achieved those targets, that would bend the curve down more to a 2.4 degree increase. There are also additional pledges being made, and if we factor those in, that would be a 2-degree increase. And if we get a bit more optimistic about what else we can do, that creates the optimistic scenario of 1.8. And what's shown is a pretty big gap between even factoring in all those pledges, targets, and some optimism. We aren't getting down to net zero by 2050 in order to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees. And what also I note from this graph is the steepness of the green shaded shape. I mean, we can't just on a dime drive emissions downwards at that rate. We can and have begun to, as we have seen in earlier graphs, begun to bend the curve down, and we need to continue to bend that curve down and do so as quickly as we can. The sooner we start, the sooner we begin moving the needle. But what I would conclude from what I've seen so far is, 2 degrees is still in play, and if everyone focuses and delivers on what they've said they're going to, and that is a stretch from current state for sure, and we can potentially do better than that, but I don't see the green shaded line is feasible. I had mentioned China. China's committed to being net zero by 2060 and India by 2070. The Western world is still striving to find paths to 2050. Just to expand on those targets a bit from a Canadian perspective, the Paris Agreement target was based on being 30% lower than the 2005 levels by 2030. So that's shown. 2005 levels are on the left at 815. The Paris Agreement is in the middle at 503. And that was just this year, with a couple of months ago, and in the lead up to COP26, for that target to be set at 40 to 45% below 2005 levels. So that's where 400 to 438 comes as the target that Canada is striving to achieve. And if you look at that graphically, that you can see historic up to 2018 and then projected to be down to around 500 by 2030. But with the increased target, or the more aggressive target, which is a reduction, that is shown here in the red line. And on top of it, 2019 there was a bit of a reduction, and 2020 is projected to be a reduction as well. I haven't seen the greenhouse gas data yet. I'm not sure if it's been fully calculated yet, but projections are around 650. So anyways, this does seem achievable. It is aggressive. We are already on that path, and there is growing acceleration around what is happening in Canada to achieve this. So I wanted to shift gears now and just put some ideas on the table for how could we dramatically reduce emissions. What are we doing, and what can we do? And I could see us having another session or discussion to go deeper on this. But first and foremost, we need to generate clean electricity. And by clean, I mean non-emitting, not adding to the emissions. And this varies dramatically by country and within countries. And so I wanted to highlight Ontario. Most of us live in Ontario. This is the electricity we're consuming. There's an app called GridWatch, which I'm displaying here, which shows in real time where is the power coming from, and what is the emission impact of that power. So at this hour, November 18th, 48% of power was coming from nuclear, 22 hydro, 17 wind, 12 gas, 0.6 bio, and 0.3 solar. And it may be surprising, some of the proportions. I was surprised wind was that big. I was surprised solar was that small. It was a cloudy day, but even the solar capacity in Ontario is about 1% of total demand. So it's not massive. Wind is very significant, and nuclear in Ontario is very significant. Some of the nuclear plants are going to be coming offline, so that's a bit of a concern. But for comparison, Alberta's energy is generated with natural gas and coal, and instead of emitting 40 grams per kilowatt hour, it's nearly 800. So 20 times the emission level is Ontario. And in contrast, BC and Quebec, where almost all the power is coming from hydro dams, is very, very clean. So how clean your electricity is a major factor. And how do we get clean electricity? How do we further clean our electricity? And those that have their electricity produced by coal and natural gas need to find a better path. So I mentioned nuclear plants coming offline for refurbishment or retirement. One area that I think has a lot of potential is a new area of nuclear generation called small modular reactors. I went to a one-day symposium on this. I learned a lot. There's about 50 designs around the world being evaluated. Some are in pilots. One design is already live. But really, from a short-term impact, this is 10 plus years out. I mean, this technology is getting to be proven. It's much cheaper, much more quicker to bring online than the traditional power plants, much safer. Some of these even use waste from existing nuclear plants. So I see this as an area of promise, but it is not a short-term fix. And fusion is also an area of promise and even further out. I wanted to show, though, an example of what I'm calling grassroots solar. You know, we've seen fields of solar panels and sometimes mountainsides of solar panels, and they play a role. But if I think about how to scale this, what if our buildings look like this? This is Canada's first zero emission positive building, and it's in Waterloo, covered in solar panels, creates the energy it needs, can send energy back to the grid, has a rooftop for parking where you get shelter and energy. I think this is the kind of thing that we need to be looking at on our homes, on our buildings. So if we have clean electricity, we need to utilize that clean electricity instead of hydrocarbon fuels. So everyone knows electric vehicles are coming. This is a tsunami, really, in terms of an industry shift. There, about 5% of global passenger cars today are EVs. Canada has set a target of having all of its passenger vehicles be electric vehicles by 2035, so 13 years from now. Ford has committed itself to delivering 40% of its sales as EVs by 2030. GM has said it will produce 30 new EVs by 2025. And of course, you know, Tesla and others. This is a huge area of shift. It's not all a panacea either. There's challenges with range, with once the batteries are expended, how do you replace them? How do you recycle them? But this is an emerging field for sure. And it's one that, you know, we need to leverage and is coming. Another idea is, okay, if we can cool our homes with air conditioners, we can heat our homes with heat pumps. Basically works like an air conditioner. We've wanted to not do this because natural gas was less pricey than electricity. But if we take an emissions perspective, it can change it, change our conclusion. And as we look at, you know, pricing and efficiency, if the clean choice is also an economic choice, and that's through efficiency, innovation, government incentive, etc., we can make different choices around how we heat. We can use the sun to heat our hot water as an example, and there are going to be many more examples. We can electrify trains. I don't know why in our country we don't have a high-speed electric train between Montreal and Toronto at the minimum, and to grow where there's enough density to support it. That would be outstanding, and quite a shift away from the diesel engines that are in use today. We and our businesses can focus on reducing consumption through energy efficiency. We can build energy efficient buildings. We can build net zero emissive buildings. We can retrofit existing buildings. We can use triple pane glass in our houses. We can use insulation, etc. There's lots of things we can do to increase the efficiency of energy. And even electrical power transmission, there's a lot of loss over long distances, and scientists and engineers are working on reducing the loss of during transmission. So just think about all the energy that's used in the world. How do we use it more efficiently or lose less of it? We can make lifestyle changes. At the end of the day, all of the energy around the world goes towards, people living, heating, traveling, being clothed, having entertainment, purchasing goods, etc. Like, it really comes down to us. So do we need to fly everywhere as often? Do we need to drive everywhere as often? Can we take public transit? Can we eat less meat? And I'm not talking about becoming, kind of a hermit in a mountain cave. People and even if we chose to, the vast majority of people will not. It has to be reasonable, and this is why, it's part of the overall solution is to be aware and look at, what can I do? Do I need that? One growing area is we're now storing data about everybody everywhere, like every picture, every video, every tidbit of social media, etc., is getting stored, and that is consuming electricity. Do we need all that? So really taking a reduce, reuse, recycle mindset, and then actively managing emissions. And in our product organization here, I wanted to spend just a moment highlighting this, because and in my career, I have not factored in emissions to the decisions I'm making, to the design, to the roadmap, but companies are beginning to, and I think we need to. So we are very conscious about costs and quality in design and procurement. And what if we focused on emissions as part of that equation? There are many companies who are really being proactive and aggressive on this front, and I'm going to highlight Apple here with their iPhone 12, but they understand the environmental impact of each of their product and are working to make that impact less. 98% of rare earth minerals are recycled. 93% of packaging is recycled. They've committed to transitioning their entire manufacturing supply chain to 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Making an iPhone generates 70 kilograms of carbon emissions. Think about that. One phone, 70 kilograms of carbon emissions, and they're already focused on minimizing that impact. And others are joining that. Where we can't use electricity, there are alternatives around non-emitting fuels. So for trucks, ships, airplanes, steel production, this is already in work. A company from Sweden, Hybrid, has made the world's first steel not using coal. And Volvo is piloting that for use in their cars. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Airbus is committed to using hydrogen to have a zero emission commercial aircraft by 2035. Boeing's committed to having planes certified to use 100% sustainable fuel by 2030. These are just some examples. The world is full of examples. It's part of, everyone thinking about how can we emit less. Another area that is somewhat controversial, I would say, is to offset emissions. In my view, this can be a good step towards awareness and reduction. So there are organizations like the UN Carbon Neutral now, a company called Verified Carbon Standard and Gold Standard that have assessed initiatives that people can invest in by buying carbon offsets that will reduce emissions on the planet. And it has to be something that wouldn't have otherwise happened and has a net positive effect on emissions. And so these bodies are there to certify that that is the case. But this is an area you could do your own homework on and further explore. And then there's carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So there are good applications of this. This is not a silver bullet. We can't just shove all our emissions into the ground or the ocean and be done with it. But there are cases where it makes sense to capture emissions. You can turn them into useful things like carbon fiber and concrete. You can bury them in the ocean in such a way that they will become rock formations effectively. That's cutting edge. So just something to be aware of in the overall equation. It's an avenue. So really, in my mind, the three areas of focus, the top three are reduce consumption, generate clean electricity, and utilize clean electricity. We can also use non-emitting fuels, offset emissions, and capture emissions, but the top three would be my area of focus. Not doing bad for time, about a minute to wrap up. So all that to say, there is a lot of growing momentum around this, and it is a global issue. Scientists have captured the data and created models and issued warnings. Activists have sounded the alarm and brought focus to the issue. Governments and agencies have shaped policies and set targets around this. Businesses are getting fully on board and will increasingly lead. Entrepreneurs are extending capabilities and bending the cost curve of new technologies. Investors are increasingly providing capital and setting emission targets on portfolios. Consumers are becoming aware and starting to consciously choose ways to lower their footprint. I think, this has been growing for years and decades, really, but from my perspective, it feels like a tipping point where all these stakeholders are coming together on a collective goal. And really, there are better alternatives to be used, and we are beginning to use them. But this is a huge emerging and growing field, and there will be tons of opportunity. So the question I'd leave this group with is, how do you want to engage? And with that, I will turn it back to you, Doug.
Thanks, Charles. This was a fabulous presentation from my perspective. I got a whiff of it, but tell me, after all the research that you've done, are you and the degree with which you've seen the challenge, are you optimistic?
Well, I gave ground on the optimism of net zero by 2050. I could be wrong on that, but personally, to answer your question, based on my very beginning part of this journey, I thought, wow, 2050, we could do it. There's all these avenues and so on. Maybe we still can. But what I am optimistic about is, just as I said, kind of the critical mass, the tipping point. This is now part of the public consciousness. There is so much technology innovation. There is funding. I really do see that we are at a place now where we could make serious dent on the trajectory. And even if 1.5 degrees is not achievable, well, what's the alternative? Continuing to spew emissions at the rate we've been, and just going about our business as usual. So to me, no, I'm thrilled that there is awareness, there is funding, there is technology, there are initiatives, there are, so many organizations that are now working the issue.
So Charles has provided a compelling summary of the problem, and I think there's a strong case for action that he's presented, and his optimism is his pragmatic optimism, I find inspiring. But Mo, could we do another poll? And let's just ask people what they think about what degree the goal of net zero emissions will be impacting their own companies. So we're in the moderate category. Most people see an impact and a potential impact on their company, but still in the middle of the road here. I think it's important to realize that governments can't really be relied on to take all the necessary actions fast enough. There are just too many competing interests. So it is really going to be up to companies and individuals. So I'm hopeful, as Charles said, that we leave this session considering what can we do personally in our own lives to respond to the information, what actions can our company take, and what actions can we as individuals in our companies take in our jobs. Let me leave you with some final words and some final thoughts. Look, we're all business people here. We worry about revenues and profits. We manage P&Ls. We strive to deliver shareholder values. We're kind of steeped in it. I've worked my entire career that way, and I think so has Charles. And this system works really well. It's created tremendous wealth and prosperity for our society and actually for everyone on this call. By the way, you may not feel rich, but relative to 95% of the population, I think we are. So, but unfortunately, this system that we're all embedded in doesn't really do a great job of optimizing for things that don't have a price. For example, like a healthy environment. So as a result, we have this terrible problem that Charles has described, and that could cause, honestly, it could cause suffering for generations, for our children, for our grandchildren. So there's kind of something really in our face here. The good news is that things are slowly changing. As Charles pointed out, there's growing pressure from governments, from investors, from bankers, from our customers, from our employees, for companies to take action. And I'd suggest that if you're not already seeing it, it certainly won't be long before these pressures are going to trigger management action. And so I would encourage you to get ahead of it in your role as a product manager or a product marketer by starting to incorporate greenhouse gas emission considerations into your planning, for example, into your product roadmaps or your marketing programs. These are things like performing product lifecycle assessments, or even doing what Charles showed Apple has done, which is determine what your product carbon footprint is. So you have a baseline to track how you're progressing. Heck, as many members of the audience probably well know, there are actually tremendous business opportunities available to all of us in addressing climate change. And I think these might be some great topics for future OPMMA discussions. So let me leave you with a little bit of philosophy here. I think everyone on this bridge is a leader because of your role as a product manager or a marketing manager in your company. So it's up to you to take action. And I think, as Charles said, we can definitely solve the problem that has been kind of eloquently presented to us, but we have to do it through collective action. So I'd like to thank you for your interest in this topic. If you haven't gone through the chat session yet, make sure you scroll through it before you leave. There's some really interesting comments, really interesting resources there. Someone mentioned reading Donut Economics, which I would also highly recommend. All in all, it's really encouraging. I want to thank Charles for his presentation, and I would really like to thank and commend the OPMMA for hosting what hopefully is just the first of many more such events on this really important topic. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you.
Well, on that note, hopefully you can hear me. Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Charles. I echo exactly what Doug had concluded with. A lot of material thoughtfully presented and well structured. So it's a lot to go through and make it digestible for everyone. So awesome job in a short time. You know, in summary, I think a part of the takeaways you might have, and I'll just make this a little bit bigger, is that Charles really well described interactions. So everything that we do, everything we consume, has a potential series of interactions that we can think about directly and ultimately indirectly. And it's a great example what Apple does as far as really going down all the way through their supply chain into the material choices and summarizing the implications of putting together a device and a carbon dioxide equivalent on each of their devices. Really, we heard that there aren't any quick fixes, and that's not surprising. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having these conversations, because there's a lot of people that have been involved with and thinking about solving and moving the bar for a while. But we think that, as Doug mentioned, and certainly Charles has articulated, there is a call to action. And we think that OPMMA and everyone in the Ottawa product management and product marketing communities can take action and can influence. And we encourage you, we've already set up our calendars, and we're inviting you to come join us again, December 8th this year, in about 2 weeks at noon, for a discussion and for continuation and brainstorming, and to determine and share with your colleagues, with peers in other organizations. Bring your friends, bring people you know, and how do you want to participate in your professional life and ultimately impact your personal life, your families, your friends, your communities, the future generations. And it is now the time that we can actually come together and make communities of product management and marketing professionals to advocate, to raise the profile, and to influence in your organizations and in your personal lives. So we look forward to having you join us. Thank you so very much for being here with us today. And we're looking forward to talking with you next in 2 weeks. And by the way, Charles has confirmed that he should be able to join us. So, we're going to be able to really go through some of the discussions and revisit some of the topics if you're interested. So thank you.
All right, great. And thanks for providing this opportunity. And one thing I had asked Doug to either ask me or say, which I'll put on the table now, is I am not a climate scientist nor a green energy expert. I'm a regular person that did research and tried to synthesize, and so this isn't meant to be a scientific presentation. It's meant to glean information from what other people have put together.
That's awesome, Charles. And just to share, if anyone is looking for, that's on today's call, or if you know anyone that you're interested in digestible, actionable frameworks, I'm happy to share. I will be on the call and the discussion in 2 weeks. I worked for over 10 years with organizations to help them measure and assess their internal and external carbon footprint and their overall environmental programs and initiatives. There are actionable, easy to use, easy to communicate frameworks for you to discuss in your organizations. There's years of best practice. There's years of information to leverage. And if you're interested in what can you do next, showing up in a couple weeks, ping us directly, reach out if you can't, if that doesn't fit in your schedules. There's a lot out there, and we're happy to help you have those conversations and move the needle and introduce a new lens in your organization, the environmental lens and the carbon footprint lens into your organization. It's going to make a world of difference. Take care.
Excellent. Thanks.
Bye-bye now.